Cheers, Kampai.
Oh my God.
God, this is the first time I've ever started one of these needing a sip of wine. Jesus. Hello, we have a special guest, Simon says it.
Hooray, all the way from America. Whereabouts in America are you, Lauren?
Florida, Central Florida.
Lauren, why don't you start
cool.
introducing yourself? Please introduce yourself. Who are you? Where are you from? What do you do?
Well, I'm Lauren Hart. I live in Central Florida, so we're actually a couple hours north of Rick Houghton. And I've been training in Shotokan karate for 18 years. My husband and I are both Sandans. We run a dojo here in Central Florida as well. And then I also do, I'm a personal trainer by day and then karate teacher by night. And then online, I do strength and conditioning stuff for karate athletes. So I do all kinds of things.
Cool. Well, thank you for joining us. We thought it'd be interesting to have not only a strength and conditioning kind of expert, but also someone from the younger generation. That was the remit.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's lots of old men talking otherwise.
And me.
Well, yeah, a very old man, and then, oh yeah, anyway, you know, guys talking. But also because we talk a lot about conditioning, we thought it'd be good to get your opinion on that. I've got some questions about that as well. So.
Okay.
Well, and also, Lauren, if you feel inclined at any point to ask us questions, please feel free. This is not a one-way street.
Right.
But it's going to start with that way. So, Simon, I think you have questions to start. Yeah.
I think.
Can I just point out, I do have questions as well. Normally, it's like Simon just talks, but like I'm taking a firm approach from now on,
right.
And I do have questions too.
That's right.
So, like Simon can start.
Virtual.
Okay, well, just in your opinion, because you teach it in the dojo, yeah, and you have, we have the kind of average student, that's no disrespect, the average sort of person who comes maybe twice a week. What would you say is the biggest weakness of those students and the exercises and types of training they need to do to improve their karate?
Okay, that's a loaded question, maybe a little bit. So I think for the average student, one, generally start off, they have a lack of leg strength. And to preface this, let me say that the best way to improve your karate is to train more karate. There's a reason that we do Kihon, obviously, because it's like the strength training of our karate. So doing more karate obviously will be a great place to start, especially with leg strength. And then you could also say maybe some similar things about core strength. So core and leg strength and stability are probably the two areas if we're going to talk about actual weakness, like physical weakness. Yeah. If you're adding supplementary training beyond what you're doing in your Kihon and in your regular training, doing very basic exercises like, like the squat, deadlift, lunges are helpful as well, but we already do a lot of single leg training in karate, so it might be a little bit redundant. And then also adding in exercises like the hip bridge or hip thrust, even though it's a little awkward, it's actually very helpful for backside mechanics and strength, so it helps to strengthen the glutes. So those are some exercises I'd suggest for lower body. And then for your core, part of that is, once again, like training more karate is going to help a little bit more with understanding how the core is supposed to be utilized and actually controlling those muscles correctly. But adding in something like a plank or like a dead bug, some kind of hollow body hold. So there's different types of core exercises that you can do. Like you can do regular crunches and stuff like that, where you're working more of the rectus abdominis. But then adding in something more like a hollow body hold where you're laying on your back and you've got your hands out or whatever, that actually works multiple layers of the abs a little bit more. So that might be helpful as well. So honestly, that's kind of general recommendations, but those are some great places to start. What we always do with our students is we have a quarterly warm up, and we try to incorporate one leg strengthening exercise, one core strengthening exercise, some kind of plyometric, a mobility exercise, and then like a general karate movement.
And you do that in the class?
Yeah, we actually do that as part of our warm-up. So it's about a 5 or 7 minute warm-up. And we do it specifically for our younger students. Our teenagers do it as well, but especially our kids will do that a lot because they need the extra work.
Yeah, well, and also I think like the bug and stuff is fun, isn't it? I kind of like to try and do exercises that are fun. Yeah. That some of the Ido Portal exercises, so I get them to be like, like the giraffe. You know, they're crossing the room, you know, as a creature, or crawling. I mean, I know Scott says he does them as well. But just generally, you know, I find your average person, they kind of don't take the karate home with them. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I suppose I'm looking for something, you know, I often say you need to go home and do 50 squats. Would you advise, like, people tend not to do enough, do they generally, or not heavy enough?
Both. Well, in general, both. So yeah, if you were trying to send someone home with something to do, starting with something very basic that they're more likely to do, because this is also slightly psychological if you're assigning someone exercises, giving them something very basic that is accessible to them, that they can easily do correctly, is a good place to start. So yes, going home and saying, you know, accumulate 50 squats. Even if you can't do 50 squats in a row, if you can do like 20 and then take a rest break and then do 20 and then take a rest break and then do 10, that's a good place to start. It depends on the fitness of the athlete. But yes, that's definitely something I would recommend.
Thank you. And just one more question. Press-ups and women. Women can do press-ups, can't they?
Yes, yeah. Good. We call them push-ups over here, same thing. But yes, they can do push-ups, but you might have to start with a regressed version. And that's the thing also with not just women, men kind of struggle with the same thing. And sometimes weaker athletes, younger athletes, they'll go through the same thing where they might have to start with a regressed version of the exercise. I actually did a consultation with somebody one time who was afraid of doing push-ups in front of her class because she was embarrassed as the sensei to require her students to do push-ups and she couldn't do them. So I was like, well, why don't you practice on your own doing regressed versions of that exercise? So she started doing just hands elevated push-ups. So they're nice because you're still using your whole body, but you're not having to use all of your weight on the movement. So that's a great place to start. And then you would gradually lower the height. You could do them on your knees as well. So those are some other options. But yes, everybody can do a push-up.
Yeah, thank you.
Of some sort.
I get to talk. So my question, follow-up question to that is if you have a choice as a karateka learning karate, and like it's a nice point, you know, like Kihon is like the weight training for our body, right, for karate. Like, at what point do you make the choice of going to an extra karate class or going to the gym to do specific exercises? So, you know, like say you're doing 2 classes a week and then you start doing 3 classes a week. At what point do you go, okay, I've got a 4th night free, I'm going to go to the gym instead? Or do you do 4 and then it's the 5th one? Or is it the 5th and then the 6th one? What do you think? Case by case.
Okay. Yeah, it is a little bit dependent. More on the goals of the athlete than anything else. So if you're in a period of your training where you're primarily focusing on like technical improvements, then maybe adding the extra day at the dojo would be better because you get the chance to actually work on those technical improvements. Now, if you're working on technical improvements and you cannot physically feel any differences, or you can't like get that breakthrough, or you're practicing the same thing over and over again and you're not seeing any changes, then sometimes actually taking a little bit of a hiatus from training as much and doing something different is actually helpful. And I think I mentioned this on the podcast with the boys a couple months ago, that sometimes adding in strength training is actually a great way to learn more about how your body works so that you can go back into the dojo and make those changes. So that's just from a technical perspective. Now, if you were a little bit more athletic, or if you're trying to gain some general strength, then yeah, maybe when it comes to that, if you're doing 2 days and you're adding in a 3rd day, or 3 days adding in a 4th day, maybe at that point it would be good to add in a strength day. And then also you have to consider like your injuries or any kind of pains you're having. If karate is producing like certain overuse injuries, or if you're experiencing a lot of pain or discomfort with certain positions, then it might be different if you're trying to increase athleticism to do something, but not do karate necessarily in that case. So maybe it's doing your strength training, since that's a lot more controlled of movements.
I remember when I was in Japan, now I can't remember the names, but there was a couple of Hawaiian karateka who were WKF competitors. And I think they'd won, there was 2 of them, and I think they'd won the world championships. I think it was a male and a female competitor, and they'd won the world championships, obviously individually. And it was reported that they only did karate twice a week. And the rest of the time they were doing gym work and supplementary training, everything. And Kagawa Sensei was outraged by it, saying, you can't become a world champion by doing karate twice a week. And we were all like, oh, Sensei. Well, actually, I was going, well, they have though, haven't they?
Yeah.
The point is, they did. So I think at some point, like that kind of stuff makes a massive difference, right?
It does, yeah. And you also have to think of things, I mean, more than likely when it came closer to competition time, they were probably in the dojo more. Now, I have worked with people who were on competitive, I'm not going to name the organization, but on competitive teams, and they almost never went to the dojo. They were strength training a lot more, and they were able to stay on the team, and they did like team kata and stuff like that, or team sparring, and they would bring home medals every single year. And I don't understand it, but that they would. But then on the flip side, if you look at other sports, there's a such thing as periodization, where during certain times of the year, you're actually taking time away from your specific sport. So you're not doing as many of those movements. Part of the idea is to give yourself a rest break. Could be like a mental break, but also a physical break. And then during that time, you're doing something else. So if you're in your off season, you're maybe not doing much of anything, more like active recovery, active rest. And then getting closer in, approaching in season, you would start doing more strength training and stuff. And then if you're in season, you're doing less strength training, more in the dojo. But I'm not saying those athletes were doing that, but that would be the logical thing if that's what they were doing.
Yeah. Cool.
There's that difference between elite athletes and like your general karate cat. And I think most people who do karate, I want people to do karate to be healthy. So, they're not going to be elite athletes. They're just ordinary people. But so the constant training is great for them. Twice a week karate and maybe once a week weight training and once a week yoga or something. I'm a great believer in that, mixing your training up, keeping enthusiasm, and having fun with it.
Right, absolutely, and I totally agree, and that's how I've always trained, and I think most people train that way anyway, where they have a consistent number of days per week they're doing karate training, and then if they want to add in extra stuff, that's where you start to make those decisions. For me personally, I probably wouldn't cut out a karate day if I'm only going twice a week, but you start to make decisions as to how much else can you handle besides doing your karate training. It's fine to do weight training, but if you're adding in 4, 5, 6 days a week, then are you taking away from your karate training? So it comes down to what your actual goal is.
We'll always say to people, you need to train more, but I'm just trying to think as a practical, nice students come to the dojo. Maybe I'm saying, if you're going to train for your Shodan, just do karate, get your Shodan, change your training up, just as a sort of day-to-day average person karate. I think it's just important to get to encourage them. Yeah. So we're moving on from fitness training to weight training. What about how important is flexibility and suppleness in karate?
In general, or as far as supplementary training?
Well, in general, because for your average karate, especially, this is kind of a guy question, because especially men. I stretch. I'm pretty supple. But when I started karate, like, men never stretched. It was like, women did yoga, men didn't stretch. And men generally are very unstretchy. No, it's true. It's true. And that's just because they don't stretch, I think. But in your dojo, do you stress flexibility, and have you any advice for people, about stretching? How often should people stretch?
So that one is another one as far as it's dependent on the person, but there are general areas of your body that are usually going to need some extra attention when you're doing karate. One of those being ankles, hip flexors, sometimes the shoulders as well. So as a general rule, adding in ankle stretching, any kind of hip flexor and hip like abductor stretching. So like front of the hips, and then doing like straddle type movements. Those are a good place to start. And then also adding in some like chest openers and that kind of thing. So if you had to only pick a few, those are 4 that without fail, pretty much everybody should probably be doing. Maybe if you did it at least, if you're younger and a little bit more mobile, maybe at least twice a week, like at least one stretch for a good minute or 2 in each position. The older you get, the more you're gonna have to add that in. And then you can also kind of pair that up with your karate training. It's not always recommended to do static stretching right before you're doing any kind of athletic movement. But if you're just doing general training, it's a good idea because it allows you to go through a fuller range of motion. And that's what's important. So even if you did that as part of your warm up, you get to the dojo a few minutes early, you go through those 4 major stretches, hold them for a minute a piece, and then go into your regular warm up, that kind of thing, or vice versa. Do your warm up, go into your stretches. Those are probably that's probably a good place to start, at least twice a week.
I mean, I remember, years ago I trained a lot. I could almost do the full splits, touch my toes, be anything, but I couldn't do this because I had that typical tight shoulders. And I think, I think even now, I think shoulders get neglected an awful lot. Again, by men especially, I think, because we hold a lot of tension here.
And it's never too late, though, is it? No matter how old you are, it's never too late to increase your flexibility. Is that right?
Absolutely. And everyone's going to have limitations. I mean, if you're older, you're going to have some limitations. You're going to have more limitations by your actual physical structure. Some people actually have bony structures that do not allow them to get into certain positions. So certain people will never have massive ankle mobility. Some people will never be able to do a full straddle because their hips are just not set up to be able to do that. Same thing with shoulders. My shoulders are actually pretty limited. So I have to constantly work on them. But absolutely, even if you're older, starting off and doing at least something, honestly, older people usually feel a big difference faster. They usually feel a whole lot better because things really start to stiffen as you age. So with older folks, definitely taking, like, if you were able to add in like 1 or 2 30-minute like yoga or stretching sessions a week, that's actually a really, really helpful. If you can't do 30 minutes or you can't do twice a week, you do what you can. Pick a couple of positions or poses or stretches that you can consistently do, because yeah, it will absolutely make a huge difference in your karate training and in your everyday life.
I do a long stretch. So after a workout, I'll spend maybe 20, half an hour doing a long, slow stretch. Really just opening my body, legs apart, arms out, flat down, really, and that's nice, especially I do a lot of running, a lot of cardio, so I'm quite hot and warm, and I'll do a long, slow stretch. Yeah. But, I mean, it does have to be quite long. It takes time,
Yeah, and static stretching is helpful also with like just that whole like zen, like calming down after you did a workout, transitioning into whatever.
I enjoy it. It's nice. I also believe in spending time with your body. So
yeah,
I mean, I've got a knee injury, and I kind of give it a bit of love. Give it some attention and put my mind on it. And it's made a big difference.
Absolutely. The other thing to remember about mobility, though, is that static stretching is kind of a good starting point, but the other thing is trying to take your movements through as full of ranges of motion slowly as possible. So that's one of the reasons why you might sometimes want to do your static stretching before you do certain types of training, because when you are strength training, when you are doing your karate training, that's generally when the body is going to actually become what's considered mobile. Mobile is being able to control a joint through a range of motion. So if you're able to work on that strength portion, you actually begin to increase the mobility of it as well. You increase the range of motion.
Like slow kicks.
Yes. Yeah. It's a good place to start.
So a lot of people often kind of argue that yokogeri shouldn't really be done because the structure of your pelvis and leg don't quite work, and maybe sometimes blamed a lot of hip replacements that are needed within karate about people trying to kick and go against bone. Like, what are your thoughts about it, and what's your thoughts about it?
Both Kikomi and Kiyagi?
Yeah, I mean, like, I mean, for me, the end position is fairly so like, okay, so for me, I've got fairly flexible hips and certainly kind of mobility to my side. So like, it took me a long time to kind of make sure that I was purposely saying, like, I'm kicking this because I can do this. But if you can't do this physically and you're trying to replicate it, you're going to cause damage. So please, a kind of giran kick is much better. A good low kick is much better than a bad high kick. But like, what would your advice be to kind of people who are firstly trying to produce a good technical kick and secondly protect their hips?
Okay. The first thing that I would start with is kind of what you had said about it's better to do a correct low kick than a good high kick, or a faster athletic high kick. That way you're actually sparing your joints as you're learning. Based on conversations with Ubel Sensei, he has maybe different points of view on what Kiyagi and Kikomi are supposed to look like. And I've seen a lot of people do those two kicks and I don't perform them the same way. And I've seen lots of variations of those. So I would argue that if you're trying to learn it, obviously go very, very slowly. This is where I feel like a basic understanding of hip anatomy or some anatomy is helpful. Even if you don't know the names of the structures, if you at least understand how the hip joint works, then it makes it a little bit easier to apply the ideas. So kind of going back to the straddle thing earlier, the reason that some people can't get into full straddles is because of the depth of their hip sockets and the length of the head of their femurs. And then also there's a connective tendon that runs kind of on the inside of the leg up into the pelvis. If any of those things are inhibiting that movement, then whenever you try to jam against that range of motion, you could be causing damage. And it might take a long time, but it could be painful, or it makes the kick look kind of weird. So I think if you can start with the principal idea of what the kick is supposed to look like and then adapt it to the actual anatomy of the person, that's a great place to start. We've got guys who are like very tall and skinny, little tiny baby hips, and they can't abduct. So they basically can't externally rotate or abduct their hips very much at all. So when we go to load side snap kick, which we would load, knee at about 45 degrees, they really can't get their knee over quite that far. So they just don't go quite that far. So their kick might look like, trying to get that knee over, and rather than kicking directly to the side, theirs may end up more of a frontal look, or like a toward the front kind of kick. That's just their anatomy, and there's not really any way to work around it. So I think if you start with the basic idea of what it's supposed to look like, and then as an instructor start to adapt it, that helps. But then also as a student, if you can at least get a grasp of what's going on with your hips based on like your own movements, paying attention to like, hey, look, my hip doesn't go any further. That's probably the furthest I can go. I better not push this. That's probably a great place to start. I would also argue that with Kiyagi, that ending position is another thing to think about. I personally rotate my hips at the end of the technique. So I actually do a slight rotation of like the front part of my body away from the technique to where it almost looks like a hybrid side or back kick, but it's not quite that far. The foot ends up at about a little bit less than 45 degrees angled down. But that's a safer position for my hip. And it also feels a lot stronger because the glutes are controlling the end of that technique. So doing little things like that where you're adjusting based on your hip anatomy is probably is going to be good as long as you're going slowly.
Yeah.
And also your feet as well, aren't they? Your foot position is really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. If your foot position is wrong, then you're going to totally mess that up. Actually,
that's the classic one you see is like, the foot straight and the kicking foot sort of up in the air. So the foot pointing that way when it should be that way. And then you're leaning back and people are going, ah.
Right. That's actually a great point. I had a student I was working on, sorry, I just mixed that up. I meant Kikomi earlier. That's why I said it. And I was like, that's not right. I meant side thrust kick. That's what I was talking about. It's been a long day. I meant side thrust kick as far as turning my hips. Okay, as far as side snap kick goes, I was working on side snap kick with a kid the other day, and that was what he was doing, was like stepping in horse stance and overstepping, and his toes were turning in the direction he was going. Well, you can't get your feet in the proper position if your toes are pointing the wrong direction. So we definitely had to fix that first, make sure he was standing properly.
That's true of all karate though, isn't it? If your feet are wrong, your karate is going to be wrong.
Right.
I had a continuing kind of conversation with Steve Sensei over the years, about Kiyagi and Kikomi, and he's like, no, how you, no, Scott, no, that's not right. You fool. And for years I was like, but Sensei, like I'm doing it. So, and eventually he did say to me, well, in Japan, they call that, so like like I'm very aware that what I do is unique. Well, not uniquely me. Well, it is uniquely in the sense that like it's me. I'm the only one who does it like me. But like there's loads of people that do it within that spectrum, like Kagawa doing it like that way, and a lot of the JKS. But he said, in Japan they called that Kiyagi Kikomi. That kind of like the form of Kiyagi and the finishing point of Kikomi. I was like, right. Well, yeah. But also. Like when you do Kikomi, like you're not going to hold it out anyway. So like like at some point the Kikomi and the Kiyagi look almost the same. Maybe the course, maybe the trajectory of the limb and everything, but like the finish point, just like Yuraken and Atiken look identical. Yeah. The course is exactly this, very different, but like as you're kind of coming out, like you don't really know if you're kind of finishing a punch or kind of finishing your racket at that point. So like the structure that you're creating is kind of the same. But so I eventually, it was what a proud moment that he gave me a little bit of ground. And then told me I couldn't do Gakuzuki, so then I go.
There you go. Yeah, I think distance is definitely going to make a difference as far as the ending position as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, for sure. And you know, I mean, we practice within the spectrum, don't we? But anyway, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, also in karate, I think sometimes we get obsessed with nomenclature, really. Sometimes, you know, if you get punched in the head, it's either a punch or a head or a back fist in the head, or if you get dropped with a side kick, you go, was it a thrust? Was it a snap? You know, if it's a kick, it's just kick to the side that works.
I don't think I would think that, but okay.
Yeah.
I would be more concerned that I got hit.
Okay, right. I'm going to go ask a question. Seems I've only been asking supplementary questions so far, which is kind of, I'm quite happy with that. But so, fascia. What's your take on fascia, and how? And is it a thing? Do we use it in karate? Do we use those kind of anatomy trains to kind of make those connections? And do you think it's important?
I think it is the minutia. That is. I think that, you know, you are technically using your fascia because it's covering your muscles. But if you think, and your muscles are attached to your tendons and all that kind of stuff, and that's how you get movement. If there is some interplay of your fascia, I think it's very minute. Because your muscles are doing the majority of the work. They're controlling the initiation of the movement, the control throughout, and then the ending point of the movement, that point of kime. And then anytime you're getting into a plyometric type movement, that's actually use of the muscle spindle. So that's essentially within the muscle itself as well. I mean, the supporting structure is a little bit, but I personally, I haven't seen any conclusive research that shows that that thinking about it or somehow trying to train it is necessarily going to make a big difference. I think that, I mean, I don't even know how you would train that, how you would train like using the fascia more than using the muscles themselves, because you can't really feel it. You can't feel the difference. You can't control it. So in my opinion, I like I said, I'm not all over the research, but I haven't really seen anything that shows that would be something to spend a lot of time on.
Okay. Just for to be clear, can you just explain what fascia is to people who might not know? Right. So fascia is the coating of the muscles. So essentially, it's like, you know, you have your tendons, and then your tendons come out, and the fascia is what's covering the outside of your muscle belly. So it's kind of like,
well, it's not only outside.
Wire system together.
It's not only outside, yeah. It's also right the way through all your muscles and
right.
also muscles, and I mean, it's a whole web. It's not just outside your. It's not right. That classical kind of interconnective tissue type of view of what fascia was, right? I mean, there is a
right,
web.
Right. It's basically in between, like it's bundling all those different muscle fibers and all those different pieces together, and that's what kind of turns into this big thing that is your muscle. So yeah, it is kind of holding all of that together.
And I think like for me though, like one of the things I kind of read recently, which I think was not recently, like last year, maybe the year before, which I thought was really interesting, is that we often talk about our bodies like or we think about our body as a kind of like you know, skeletal. So we're thinking like you know, literally one bone's connected to the next bone, and you know, you can make a song about it, that type of thing. And like, you know, we think about like that kind of bridge where you're having, you know, block, and then you have the keystone, and that makes your kind of structure. Whereas we're much more like you know, using the bridge analogy, much more like a suspension bridge, right. where the, you know, we're in tension, and it's various tensions from one side to the other that can create movement. And I think for me, that kind of resonates in the sense that, like, rather than thinking about kind of you know, if we think about our arm and how to use our arm and well, that's just a concept, because we can't just use our arm. Everything is a total body action. Everything is a total body movement. And the way I conceptualize it, or the way that I allow kind of fascia to help me kind of think about those things, is that when I do a technique, I am not just punching with my arm. And we can say, okay, well, you're punching with your arm, and you use your hip and you use your driving leg. But even that's incorrect, because you're still dissecting three elements of your body when actually it's a holistic movement. And by kind of taking the kind of suspension bridge, fascia kind of blah, blah, blah approach, it means that you're kind of doing a total movement rather than bits of movement.
Right. I can see what you're saying. I feel like that comes down to more of a terminology use, because you're right. You are using your whole body. I would argue that it's not you necessarily controlling the fascia, but like I said, there is more research being done on that. So they may start to find that there is, a little bit more control of that you can have. But I definitely agree that you're not just using your arm, you're using your whole body in some way.
Yeah, but also, I don't particularly feel like the fascia is in control, but what I do sometimes feel, and I think is quite evident, is that by the use of one element of your body, it does have a knock-on effect to the other.
Oh yeah.
Through that transfer of, because if I think that everything is connected, so if I'm moving my leg, like I was teaching this yesterday, like for example, I was teaching the start of Teki Shodan. And like just to start, as you're bringing, your leg arches or your knee comes up, whichever kind of variation you do, ultimately it's going to go down, and you can use that to transfer to make the high shuke, rather than just being. And you can see these people who just do an arm movement, whereas it's kind of like it's kind of very, very noticeably different when someone the start of the high shuke is the end of the previous technique. As the leg comes down, that initiates the high shuke. And I think like that is kind of a very noticeable difference, rather than dissecting it. You're doing a leg movement and then you're doing a hand movement. So I think describing your body in that way, or understanding your body in that way, is kind of an important concept.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's very similar to the whole stretch shortening cycle type thing, where you're moving one part first and then allowing it to kind of pull the other part along, or like putting it on stretch and then kind of utilizing that into the technique. That's kind of a similar idea.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, which kind of really, because of my body type, I'm quite flexible, right? So like that really kind of resonates with me, and I do a lot of that. Like my next question, I'm going to get a second question in. Simon's on a bit of a lull, so I'm going to get in. So you, I know that you guys, you train a lot with Steve Sensei, kind of virtually and in real time when you can, and I know that you train a lot with Rick Sensei. Like, how do you marry those two divergent views of karate? I mean, I don't mean just on a purely physical level. I mean, of course, like the kind of mental approach or kind of philosophical approach of karate is also very different between those two. But just on a physical level, how are you marrying those two things together? Because Rick Sensei would be very much, that kind of whip, stretch, shorten, cycle kind of karate, which is beautiful. And then Steve Sensei is very much that kind of complete connection all the time, which is also equally beautiful. So how do you marry those two things together?
Personally, we've made the conscious decision that we feel like the way that Steve thinks and teaches and moves is an ideal, and that there are a lot of principles there that can be applied elsewhere. So when we're learning from him, and then we're also learning from other teachers, we're watching the principles that we've learned from him in motion. So we're not going to agree with everything that every instructor says, and that's not exclusive to Houghton Sensei, that's others as well. So it's fascinating sometimes to listen to other people teach, because even if they describe something a little bit differently than maybe the way that Steve Sensei describes it, sometimes it actually makes a little bit of sense to me, or maybe the way that they say it allows me to investigate that principle further. So that's not to say that we are trying to necessarily do both styles of karate. We've chosen that Steve is essentially our sensei, but we respect others and we want to learn from other people as well. We're just kind of taking those ideas and internalizing those, and then also allowing that training time and that investigation to go on while we're training with others as well.
So do you see it as different style, do you?
I'm sorry?
Do you see it as two different styles?
I do. Yeah. I think, I feel like there's different principles being emphasized between Steve Sensei and Rick Sensei. That's basically on the way that they describe how they're moving, or even watching, you can see that there's a bit of a difference. So yeah, I would say that there are stylistic differences, but that's the same between yourself and Rick Houghton, or yourself and Richard Amo Sensei. I mean, I feel like we all have our own little stylistic things that are a little bit different, even if we're talking about the same thing.
I mean, something that Ross Ross once said. He said Shotokan is a bit like the gymnastics of the Budo world, because a gymnast is so well attuned. Like, they need flexibility, they need strength, they need explosive power, and really, if you get a really good gymnast and then take them into any other sporting endeavor, they'll probably be able to do a good job at it. And Shotokan is very similar in the sense that, if you look at the forefathers of Shotokan, you have the likes of Nishiyama Sensei, or Asai Sensei, or Kase Sensei, or Shirai, or Nakayama Sensei, or Kanazawa Sensei. The whole spectrum of what is possible, and they all learn karate from Nakayama Sensei. So what happened there is you've got a whole kind of wide variety of karate, but it's Shotokan. And if you kind of study that, then all of a sudden you're becoming a very kind of eclectic kind of student, which then allows you to be ultimately really dynamic, which is forever changing. This situation, okay, this principle, this situation, this principle, constantly changing and being dynamic within your karate. So yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think it's really interesting that, like, it's always nice to have one person to follow, because you do need that insight, and that, okay, this is my kind of guiding light, but then be able to go, okay, well, let me use this guiding light to reference that and to kind of build and to create that kind of gymnastic karateka.
It's almost like ballet, though. I think classical ballet is like the ultimate form of dance. So that you say, a classical trained ballerina can probably do any dancing. Because and I think Shotokan maybe has a similar sort of ideal. It's the most athletic type of karate. And
it's like tour. Like, my wife, she did ballet from age 3 until 18, and on point and all that kind of stuff, and then went to university and quit ballet immediately, but started Shotokan, and she got her black belt in like less than 3 years. I mean, just double grading every single time.
Yeah, because if you train proper classical ballet, you've got a trained body. If you train gymnast, it's that training, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, she got her black belt, I think, at the end of the 3rd year, and that was not kind of training. That was only university schedule, which was like, I don't know, it was what, 7 months a year that they were actually at university. So because she just had it, had that intelligence.
Yeah, and I definitely think that committing yourself to some consistency, at least for a while, where you're working on fundamentals. And to be honest, I'm still working on a lot of fundamentals. I feel like that's a great place to start. And then when you're branching out beyond that to change your karate or in some way stylize what it is that you're doing, I definitely would argue the same thing, that it's nice to have other influences as well. But I kind of feel like that's maybe where we are mentally, is like we're still like, we're fixing things here and there and trying to have some consistency in our own movement. And then I feel like it'll be easier to do other things.
Okay, so I've got a question for you, right? Is it inevitable that if you do karate, your body will break?
Okay, no, it's not inevitable. It's very much dependent on how you're training, how you're applying your training to your body structures, how often and how long you train, if you're giving yourself enough rest breaks, if you're giving yourself time off from injuries, and then gradually building back up to tolerance of certain postures and positions, sometimes even making changes so that you don't get injured again. I think all of that is important, and those are all factors that play into whether or not you break your body in the long term. Also, sometimes having a coach or a watchful eye to be able to tell you those things is also helpful. But, it's not inevitable, even though that's what a lot of karateka think, is that it's inevitable that I'm going to get my knees or my hips replaced. It's inevitable that I'm going to have some kind of back issue or, whatever it is that people think that karate people always get. And that's not to say, that's not to dog on the people who have had knee and hip replacements, like that you're doing something wrong, but sometimes you just don't know. Everyone's body is a little bit different. Certain things, like for example, Langley, you just said that your hips are a little bit more mobile than other people's. There is a chance that if someone with very immobile hips tries to do what you're doing, they might hurt themselves. And it's just because there's differences in anatomy. So knowing your differences and like what's going on with your body is a great place to start. But then, you know, just basically listening to your body overall and being able to back off whenever.
So I think there's a generational issue in this. There's a generational issue in this because my generation, unfortunately, kind of thinks it's good if you're injured. So like, you know, people like did Makiwara training. Even now I'm on a Makiwara forum and Paul Enfield Sensei from Goju-Ryu's on it. He's brilliant. And then people will often post the hands and all the hands are cut up. And like Paul will go, no, stop, don't do it. But you know, there's still that old school Budo thing. You know, if you haven't broken your body, you haven't trained properly.
Well, I have to say, I've got kind of fairly bad knees, although they're great. I've got really good bad knees, right?
Me too.
And so I've never had any. I've got no ACL in my left knee, and I've got torn meniscus is in both knees, and I've got torn MCLs in both knees, and I've never really had anything done to them. No operations, nothing, except a few years ago. Like I was really struggling, and I went for a steroid injection in my left knee. And it's the only thing I've ever had in what is now 23 years, or since I really had major injury, and I went and. It was an injection through under X-ray, so it was like, you know, it was like I was on the table and they were X-raying it, and the technician, you know, the guy who was doing it, he was like, okay, and he was chatting away and blah blah blah, and he's like, oh, what do you do? And so I was like, oh, karate and blah blah blah. Oh, okay, and he said to me, he says, oh, well, you know, much rather your joints wear out than your heart and lungs wear out. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
but actually no. I don't want anything to wear out. I want to just stay healthy and strong. And I look at people like Steve Sensei, who's now, 402 or whatever he is. I don't know what he is.
Is he 70 odd? Is he 70? Yeah.
Sorry?
Is he 70 or so?
74?
Wow, okay. Wow.
Okay. Yeah. He's ageless.
Yeah.
But, look at him. Like I was over, I mean, it's been, what is it? It's been 2 years since I last saw him because of pandemic. So, it's been a year and a half because I was there the that's it. I was there the October of 2019, and we're training in the freezing cold squash court. Yes, this freezing. Have you been a lot? It's the first squash court at Wayne's. Oh God! I mean, I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining in the slightest. But you know, Wayne is part of that the country club place, and so I was staying with Wayne, and we had special training because I was there, and it was me, Wayne, and Steve Sensei, and I think one or two others. And this squash court is absolutely Baltic. It's just absolutely Baltic. And anyway, so we have to get changed in the squash courts, and I'm freezing. And Steve Sensei takes his top off, and he was like, what, 72, 73 there, with a six-pack. I'm like, I've never had a six-pack. I do like wine, so maybe that's what it is.
Maybe. You have to do your ab wheel more like he does.
Absolutely.
So, Lauren, what year did you start karate?
2002.
2002, okay. So, I mean, you're one of the reasons we want is you're almost this younger person's view of karate. So, I started karate in 1974. So it's, a long time ago. It was in black and white. It was such a long time ago. But, when you started karate, I mean, so why did you start karate? And then were you ever have to deal with the cultural baggage of sort of faux samurai, macho, Bushido nonsense? I mean, have you had much dealings with that? And men in the dojo, how have you found them?
Okay.
Does it do
Start at the beginning of your question. So I started karate because we live in a very small town and there's not a lot for people to do. And I was actually a dancer and I did baton and I was terrible at it. I used to like hit myself in the head with the baton. So because my dance teacher moved away, my mom wanted to get me involved in something else. And my brother had done karate when he was a little boy. So she asked if I wanted to start training and I did. So I was 9 years old at the time. And there was definitely, I stayed because I'm a very aggressive person. So I needed something to get the aggression out. Karate has taught me many skills, and one of those is controlling anger and aggression and bad words. So anyhow, but so that's part of the reason that I stayed, and I loved that kind of that very athletic outlet while being able to express that aggression, I guess. And as far as the very bastardized version of Japanese culture, I think that's what you're asking. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Cobra Kai stuff, you know?
Just about. So I don't want to speak ill of my previous sensei, but what it looked like in the dojo before I was there is the people in our community who used to be in our dojo whenever they were younger, it was just a bloodbath. All they did was fight. They just fought all the time. Young kids fighting like crazy. Like that's basically, that was class. You just got in there and you just whooped the crap out of each other until time for class to be over and you went home. And it scared a lot of people away. So that was kind of the very machismo like background of the dojo. And then at some point they made like a 180 flip and they became a little bit more Americanized, like McDojo-ish, where there was hardly any sparring at all. So there was this very like golden days, old glory days feel where for some of the higher ranks of the instructors and the black belts, where they would definitely talk about their own history with sparring and being in the dojo and beating up other people. And I beat up this guy in a tournament one time and I fought this guy in a bar and whatever. So there was that attitude. And then anytime they heard of any kind of Japanese history, or they talked about like, so a lot of our guys are all, a lot of Florida's karate comes from Takashina originally. Like a lot of these guys originally. Takashina?
Oh yes, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So like my instructor and the other instructors trained with him as well. So there's maybe some influence there as far as their perspective. And then also, I don't know where they got these stories from, but they would tell us these old samurai stories and stuff, and we thought they were awesome. So we would go home and tell our parents, and then the instructor would forget that he told us that story, and he would tell it to us like 10 times, but that's beside the point. So yeah, we got a lot of that. Yeah. And lots of misunderstanding about Japanese culture as far as like the respect thing. I don't know. Do you guys have a policy in your dojos as far as who cleans the dojo?
No, everyone. Well, in my dojo, everyone just cleans. All the students just clean the dojo. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I get my students to run up and down sometimes and do the old towel thing, but I do it with them.
Right. So I don't know where the instructors got this idea from, but there was this idea that if one rank person starts to sweep the dojo, then it is imperative that a lower ranked student comes and takes the broom from them and starts doing it until the lowest ranked person in the dojo is cleaning. And back then we just thought that was normal. So there was weird customs like that we thought were things that were not things. And that actually didn't really help for building a dojo community. It just made people angry and made the dojo not ever get cleaned. So there was stuff like that we did deal with. Sorry.
Men, what about men in the dojo?
So when I was younger, I didn't really notice any kind of like sexism or anything like that. There was definitely that machismo thing, like I mentioned, like everyone wants to talk about how they beat somebody up. And I'm not gonna lie, I have fallen prey to that as well. I very fondly remember beating the crap out of a Shodan after his Shodan exam. It was fantastic. I had bloody knuckles. I even have a picture of it. But besides like that kind of machismo attitude and that bit of ego, which I think is really prevalent in probably all martial arts, but I noticed it in Shodan because that's where I am. I never personally had any issues with sexism. It wasn't until I think maybe I was older, or until I started to travel outside of the dojo, going to seminars and things like that, where I started to really notice anything like that. You go to a seminar and you try to train with somebody and you try to do what the instructor is saying. And then they're like, no, that's not that. It's supposed to be this thing. You're doing it wrong. That might not be a sexism thing. That might just be the person doesn't want to listen to instructions. But that was the first time I ever noticed anything that was kind of off. I'm like, when I'm in my own dojo, I don't get treated like this. Like I say, hey, we're supposed to do this thing. We do this thing. I was at that point, I was the highest rank in our dojo anyway. But that's the most that I've noticed as far as personal experience. Cause I'm only 28. So that was my kid and teenage years up into my early 20s. In my early 20s, I wasn't in the dojo as much. I was training more on my own because I was in college. When I came back to the dojo, I was managing the dojo and there were almost no adults. So we were kind of starting over. So I personally just haven't had the opportunity to be exposed to a lot of that stuff. The other thing is that Jeremiah and I are extremely strict on how our dojo culture is being grown. Strict, I use that term loosely, but because we don't bring that attitude and we don't bring that machismo, like very male dominated attitude, our dojo doesn't have that. Even though we have lots of men in the dojo, they're fantastic. They're open to talking about things and listening to other points of view. They're not originally from our dojos. Some of them are from Takashina's club. Some of them are from other parts of the US and they've moved here. But because we're creating a culture that is very like, we just want to train, it helps to negate any of that stuff that we would see maybe influencing our students.
Yeah, I think one of the great judges, Kumite is a great judge of character. I quite watch, if I watch people who go on Kumite, how they interact with their partner is kind of really interesting. You know, whether, especially if they're a black belt and the partner's a yellow belt or a woman or a kid or an old person, I think it says everything about your character is how you do that. You can be a dork, or you know, or you can be too soft. I think it's a really interesting way. And I often think, you know, when I first trained with women in the 70s and weren't training, I was terrified because, you know, I didn't quite know what to do. And then I met people who were good, and then they were just people who were good at karate. And then it sort of became gender neutral, I think, which was wonderful. But, yeah, it's just...
And that was something we noticed in the old dojo as well, is like, because we had that attitude where, like, for example, the one where I beat up the Shodan, we had another really weird custom where whenever someone would pass their Shodan exam, supposedly they were supposed to spar every single person in the class.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, we did that, but the problem was that the class was very small and they were mostly lower ranked individuals, so a lot of white belts and stuff like that. And this guy was what we call a hot dogger. So he was hitting students. So I was the highest rank. So I was just counting how many times he hit him. And I hit him that many times and more. Yeah. But so that was one of those, like, he did not have the control whenever sparring with lower ranked students. But then on the flip side, the dojo that we've built now, it's super funny because when we'll do like slow sparring and stuff, everybody's like laughing, even though we're going slow and stuff and we're like bumping into each other. Everyone's just having a good time. Nobody's getting angry, even though people are bleeding all over the floor and we've got arms cut and people are like all over the place.
Well, yeah, if you ever watch any clips of Scott Sensei's dojo, a lot of the people there are laughing all the time when Scott's hitting the pad and knocking them about. They're having a great time.
Yes.
But we do happy karate, and I think, you know, don't confuse happy karate with bad karate. You know, like, you know, hard karate, you know, is not necessarily good karate. You know, I think that's really, really important.
You can be very happy training and still be very serious about what you're doing, and still, you know, even take criticism, and criticism meant with good intent. You know, that's why that was one of the questions I think from the boys podcast previously, as they were talking about the attitude of accepting criticism from Ubel Sensei, because he sometimes doesn't seem to be very bubbly, but he means it well. So for us, it's fun because you're getting that feedback from an instructor, and then you're having a good time while you're, you know, feeling crappy.
But also sometimes, you know, if you train in the morning with Scott Sensei with the instructor training, you do Tabata intervals or something, and it's very much like, okay, you know, let's do it. And, you know, that's hard, really hard training, you know, or the weight vest training, tube training, you know, that's hard training. But at the end of it, we have, you know, if you're not, you know, we're laughing about it, but it's hard training. And it's not like, oh, I did tube training. It's like, what? I did tube training.
It's one of those things where like slap happy and happy when it's done.
When it's finished, yeah. Karate's always the best karate is when it's over.
Yes.
All pleasure in karate is cathartic.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I have one last question. I have one last question to finish off, unless Lauren has some questions. But so, what's struck me about, like, okay, like once upon a time. Actually, the first time I ever appeared in a magazine, it was in Shotokan Karate magazine. I was called the next generation of karate instructors. Now I'm not. So, Lauren, how's the next generation of karate instructor?
Nice link, Sensei, nice link.
I'm so old now. So it's really nice to see that you're not kind of bogged down by, well, not only you and also Jeremiah, but also kind of a whole host of instructors and kind of like, dare I say, junior instructor. You're like Sandan, junior instructor. So these next generation of junior instructors, I would say, like Ross and Rue in my dojo, AJ. Well, AJ's a bit older, but like the whole, there's a whole load of people like that, and you're not bogged down by that kind of draconian kind of organizational heavy kind of karate. Where you're told what to do. It's all absolute, and that's really nice. It's really nice to see. And I think it bodes well for the future. What do you do to stop this going from that point to stop this kind of postmodernist view where, well, everyone's opinion is of equal matter? When you don't have that kind of heavy down structure telling you what to do, blah 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 blah. Like that's really quite negative. But there is a positive about that, in the sense that if it's good karate, then you get taught good karate. But it can obviously be, it's a double-edged sword. But there's also a double-edged sword about not having that. So what do you do? I kind of know, and I think you do.
What do I do?
Yeah, but explain to the people at home, the 4 or 5 people that are going to listen to this. What do you do to stop yourself getting to the point where you go, well, whatever I do is fine?
Personally, is that what you're asking? What I do personally?
Or yeah, what you do, what you and Jeremiah do. I mean, I know what you do, and I think you're doing it really well. But I want you to explain, because I know that I'm not trying to lead you the answer, but I know that you're in contact with Steve Sensei, etc., and you're kind of open. But so my point is because you're not part of like that organization which is telling you what to do and like awarding you rank and blah blah blah. Mm-hmm. How do you still progress?
Well, the first thing is we have chosen to have a solid reference point. Even though we are in no way tied to Steve Sensei, other than the fact that we choose to train with him, we're not under any obligation to, yet we choose to because we value what it is that he's teaching and we've seen the benefits of it. So we avoid, because we're using that as a reference point, it helps us to say, okay, if this is the ideal and this is what this person is saying or teaching, how does it relate to what this reference point is? Now, personally, my secondary reference point is because I have a background in sport and exercise science. I can also look at, things that people are doing or showing or saying, and I'm able to reference it to that. Like, is that good basic human movement? If it's not, then I kind of throw it out. If I see something that looks like maybe it could lead to injury long-term, or maybe it's something that I know most people probably couldn't do, then that's another way that I kind of view that. As far as like organizational stuff and rank and all that kind of thing, I can see where there is value in that, and that, where I don't want to be offensive saying this, so I'm trying to be careful.
Well, I wasn't talking about ranks, so if you want to, I wasn't.
Right. Okay. Well, just, basically just, we've made the decision that it's not as important. Like we want to see improvements in our karate. I think the hard part that we as a society are going to run into and as a generation are going to run into is because we are the social media generation. We have information overload. So even though there's not any kind of regulation of what is being shared, because there's no regulation of what's being shared, there are lots of ideas being thrown about. The problem is that a lot of times social media kind of validates those opinions. And that can be where we run into issues, is because something is new and different, or it's explained differently or shown differently, we automatically think that it's better. So I think that it's important for everyone to have that reference point that they're coming from, is like, what do I have a person or a solid idea of what I want my karate to look like? If it's not based on organizational structure, if it's not based on something that's being fed to you by an organization, is there something that you can start off as a reference point with, and then be able to compare things to that, whether it's fancy things on social media or if it's something that a teacher is kind of showing you? I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of what we do.
No, I think it's a really interesting point, because I think that whole old model of organizations which a lot of younger instructors have rejected, you know, and they're just saying like, the negative elements of that is too much for to justify the positives. And so, you know, people are making choices to kind of find their own way or so like that. But then equally, that's double-edged sword where you're not getting told what to do, but also you're not getting told what to do. And if you need an answer, sometimes you need to be told what to do. So like finding that balance, I think, is super important. And I think as things develop, you know, the old draconian kind of top-down organization, I think, is dead in the water. I think a community-driven kind of organization where people are much more kind of just getting together, and you have peer-reviewed kind of, you know, like I'm capable of doing Dan examinations, but I never do a Dan examination really in my own dojo. You know, I always get people to come in and go, what do you think about this? You know what I mean? I think that kind of model of peer-reviewed kind of organizations or peer-reviewed gradings, well, like grading's not really that important. The idea of progression, peer-reviewed progression, and also being able to discern what is good. And I think it's a really good point about the information heavy kind of social media, and people getting validated by social media doesn't necessarily mean they're good. But yeah, I think it's the reaction to this heavy down organization that has gone over the last 40, 50 years has been what you guys are kind of doing, which is really good. But then how do you then manage the problems that arises, which I like, with the idea of having Steve as your mentor and as your kind of, this is my guiding light, I'm going to reference everything through this, is a really important kind of...
It's also really important what you said. You've got this background, you've got an academic background, you've studied, you've done your apprenticeship. Right. You know, I think you need pedigree. I think, you know, it's a meritocracy, but you need a pedigree. So like, you know, I'll ask you questions about sports science because you know more than me about it. Because you've studied it, so that this is you're coming from a base. You're not like making this stuff up as you go along. So like everything you do will be informed by what you've studied, won't it? In the same way that everything that Scott Sensei does and I do is based on years of experience. Right. And you know, just pedigree.
That's one of the things that Steve Sensei does really emphasize is like, you should be doing your own research, even if you're getting information from a specific source. And I feel like that's maybe something that is not as emphasized by those draconian organizations, is they don't want you to have your own free thought. And he's the opposite. He wants you to be able to dig in and find, now obviously you have to make sure you have good resources. That's going to be the struggle, is because sometimes Facebook is not the best resource, but being able to find TikTok, God.
You get good dancers.
Okay. Well, there's probably karate people on there too. Finding good resources of like other instructors who have been able to show that they have that, that would be, it'd be their ethos, I guess. They're like their validity of where they're coming from and what they're actually teaching. So being able to have other instructors, being able to find other like literature resources, if you have the capability of reading that kind of thing, doing other research in addition to having a specific reference point or having a person who is able to coach, that's very helpful. Just to give you an example of this, there was, when I was in college and even before that, I had a mentor that he was essentially trying to style my training, and he also helped Jeremiah a little bit as well, along with what we understood Steve Sensei's teaching to be. But we didn't have access to Steve at that point, and we were watching videos and trying to like absorb the information from there. What we ended up doing was not what Steve was teaching. And when we would have discussions with my mentor, when I would have discussions with him, or when Jeremiah would privately have discussions with him as well, he got to the point where he wasn't open to that. He wasn't open to us having free thought. He wasn't open to us disagreeing with him. And he also, but on the flip side, he wasn't able to back up what he had to say. He didn't have enough of an understanding to be able to validate his points. So when you get to that point with someone, if they can't back up the reason they're asking you to do something, or if they're not open to open discussion about whatever, you know, the issue is with what you're learning, I think that's a good time to cut that relationship off, or at least take a step back. And that's what ended up happening with us as well.
But you don't want to be a clone of Steve Sensei either, because you can never be a clone of Steve. And it's not like you write everything down and take pictures of him and then copy all his shapes. Yeah. You're taking all the stuff you've got and stealing stuff off Steve to make your karate unique, aren't you? And lots of associations tend to make the new people coming up almost like clones of the other people.
You can see when someone is when someone's trying to make themselves a clone of someone else.
Yeah.
What usually happens is they don't pick up as many of their good traits as it is their like idiosyncrasies. So there's a thing that Steve does with his hand, and you can tell people who have trained with him because they will do this thing with their hand. I'm not gonna tell you what it is, but people will do it. And it's like, you're not using it the way that he's using it for timing, I think. But I'm not gonna do that because that's not a thing. But you can see that with people who choose to make themselves clones of people. No, I will never be a clone of him. I don't have the same body style. I don't need to do the hand thing, whatever. So no, I'm not trying to do that.
Cool.
Good answer.
Well, I think we've exhausted our questions.
Right, next time I'll come.
Really good to meet you. Really good. I hope to meet you sometime. Come and see us over here.
I will try. Maybe when all of this calms down.
So we're gonna finish up by morphing both the Beyond the Dojo podcast and the Humble Dojo podcast, and say to Lauren, what failures of the week are you working on at the moment?
What am I working on?
So what failures of the week? Failures of the week. So the Humble Dojo do failures of the week, and you guys do what are you working on at the moment? Right. So what failures of the week are you working on at the moment, Lauren?
Let's see. What failures of the week am I working on? That one's going to be a tough one. Hold on. I can come up with something.
There is no failure in this dojo.
That's true. There is no failure in this dojo. Let's see. Did I do something last week? I make up so many mess ups. I guess like based off of the post that I made last week about all the crazy stuff that happened in the dojo last week, I am working on, if I'm going to work on avoiding a failure from now on, when Jeremiah says, Lauren, I will look up from my phone because there is a child more than likely standing in front of me with no pants on.
Wow.
We had a 7-year-old, her pants just went whoop, just fell straight down, standing in her underpants. And I'm like, oh my God. And I'm like pulling her pants up, trying to walk her to her dad. It happened twice. The second time I was like, screw this, I'm tying her pants on. So I'm working on not doing that. Hopefully none of those fails this week. How about you all? What failures are you working on?
Well, life.
So you guys get the easy way out? What is this?
Hey, no, it took me 2 hours to go for a run the other day. I didn't want to go, it was cold, and I got really grumpy and miserable, and I finally went for a run. And then when I came back, I felt good. But it took me 2 hours of faffing about, having another cup of tea, and I'll have a biscuit for some energy, and then finally I went for a run.
Well, next time if you end up not doing the run, just pull out that barbell you showed me and pop out a set of front squats.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
And I suppose I've been working on both my and everyone else's mental health, because Ireland has been in lockdown since Christmas Eve, and we still are going to be in lockdown until the 26th of April, and then we're going to be allowed to train outside, but only children, not adults. And we're going to be allowed to do click and collect for non-essential retail.
Wow.
Until May sometime. So I'm working on just day by day, because...
You know what? I think in lockdown, you've just got to be kind to yourself as well.
Right.
Because it's hard, isn't it?
Yeah.
I did my first outdoor class on Thursday, and it was fantastic. I almost cried because people came. I didn't know who's going to come. That was lovely. And then suddenly we're outside on a field training. It was great. Yeah. And they'd all forgotten all the credit.
So
but it's good. It's very good.
On that positive note, we will say a huge thank you to Lauren and give our regards to Jeremiah, and hopefully we'll get him on the podcast one day. And thank you for all your time and effort.
Yeah, thank you. Nice
no
to meet
problem.
you.
Hopefully I'm not too controversial in some of those answers.
Cheers.
Cheers.